now joined by Mdumiseni Ntuli, the Provincial Secretary. Let's start off by reflecting then on the shooting of your newly elected mayor in eThekwini, a region that has been marred by political killings in previous times.
Well, Tengasi, first and foremost, let me convey our sincere and deepest condolences to the family of Comrade Mdumiseni Ntuli, one of our ward councillor elected hardly 2 months ago, who has been gunned down. Of course, what is deeply troubling to us is that this is not the first councillor or the first leader of the ANC to die in the recent past. And of course, we are heavily reliant on the work that is being done by the law enforcement agencies to ensure that they take down the perpetrators and they are ultimately apprehended and conviction is secured. Because you see, this ward, we did not have any major issues there, even when Comrade Mdumiseni Ntuli ascended to the position of becoming a councillor. There was not a stiff competition. This was a ward led by an independent, and of course the ANC worked very well, very hard to ensure that we reclaim our position in that area, and ultimately Comrade Mdumiseni Ntuli got elected as our ward candidate.
Let's now change tact a bit here. You are meant to have your own provincial elective conference. I think it's meant to take place in July. What preparations do you have in place to safeguard against any loss of life, knowing the history of this particular province when it comes to these kinds of elections, and just how divided this province is, Mr. Ntuli, knowing that, as I've heard, that there are now 3 slates that are emerging. One with Dr. Ziyanda Ngcobo, the former health minister, and apparently the current chair of this province, Sihle Zikalala, is not even emerging on any of those slates.
Well, you see, the situation in the province is quite different from what it was in 2017. I always say to a number of people about that. We've already done 5 of our 11 regional conferences. All of them have gone very well. Of course, there was a contestation of leadership positions, which is inherent in our politics as a democratic organization. But those contestations were not as fierce as they would have been, or they were actually in 2015 and 2016. Which resulted into the province being to some extent very paralyzed, very divided, and incapable of providing the strategic leadership that is supposed to provide even as we go to a national conference. The situation is quite different now. We are left with 6 of 11 regions, including a eThekwini region, which is our biggest region. All of them are going to take place before the end of March, and we're quite certain that the same trend, the same trajectory we've observed with the past 5 regional conferences is still going to permeate in the rest of the regions that are going to take place, and on our way to a provincial conference. I've seen a number of slates as well, which are punted by, I mean, some of them are very strange, even in terms of the combination that has been there. You are saying you haven't seen one with the provincial chair. I've seen 4 of them, actually, with the provincial chair being touted as the incoming provincial chairperson, some of them with myself as secretary, in others without me as being part of that leadership. So I think it's still very ill now. Once the process formally begins with the nomination of leadership in April this year, I think we will then be in a better position to say who exactly is being favored by structures of the movement.
You are the provincial secretary, so you'd also be overseeing the process going into the 55th National Conference. As the province of KwaZulu-Natal, are you certain, can you say with certainty that this province will be united? I know that this province, after the Nasrec conference, you lamented the fact that you don't have someone from the province of KwaZulu-Natal in the top 6 of the ANC.
I'm very, very confident. Very, very confident that going to the next 55th National Conference of the ANC, you will see a quite different KZN from what you saw in 2017. In a sense that, one, the province itself would be very united, solid behind whatever position that it would later adopt when discussions are open. But equally, there has been a great deal of work that has been done. We are the only province, if I'm not mistaken, which convened a conference, provincial conference after the national conference of the ANC in 2017, and elected the leadership into the Provincial Executive Committee that represents, to a very larger extent, the dynamics and the leadership capabilities that you have in the province. And that has allowed us to proceed, to surge very well from that time to today with a stable province, a united provincial leadership. Of course, it may very well be that as we approach the national conference, views will emerge, will surface of different opinions and different suggestions. But I'm quite certain that by the time we enter the door of the national conference of the ANC, it will be a collective of KZN leadership leading solid and united branches of the ANC behind a commonly adopted position that would have been finalized by that time.
There is a view, however, Mr. Ntuli, that this province of KwaZulu-Natal is predominantly aligned to the RET faction. How are you going to shake this off?
Well, it's a very seriously untested perception, and I know where it originates from. It's because some of the activities of the so-called RET forces are happening here in KZN, but also because...
Predominantly here in KZN, if I would actually argue, whether you're talking about the July unrest last year, which has largely been attributed to the RET forces, a lot of those activities either emanate from here or they take place here.
That's correct, but you see the position we've adopted as a PC, which we've insisted on, including as we engage with the national leadership and society in general, is that we need to isolate the ANC conference resolutions on radical socio-economic transformation from a group of people who have appropriated that to them and are merely using it as a slogan to campaign for a particular agenda rather than advocating and advancing the policy imperatives aligned to the question of economic transformation. It's happening here in the province, but as I'm saying, if you look at it, it's to a larger extent very insulated from the formal structures of the ANC. That's why we've had 5 regional conferences.
But your name is being used. Sorry, I have to jump in there. But your name is largely being used for these, as a province, for these activities, which is quite a dangerous thing going into the 55th National Conference, because maybe you're just not going to be as united as you'd like to assume. You
are quite correct. The name is being used in public by the so-called RET forces whenever they are making their public pronouncements, whether in favor of former President Zuma or for any agenda that they want to advocate at a given moment. But the fact of the matter, as I'm saying, is that none of those forces, I'm saying forces because here I'm referring to people who are not genuinely representing the agenda of a radical socio-economic transformation, people who are sloganizing and who are leading a campaign to position themselves using that resolution conference of the ANC. I'm saying they are not having any impact. If you look at the conferences that have taken place, the 5 regional conferences, and I can assure you that with the remaining 6 regional conferences as well as the provincial conference, you would not find that kind of attitude and narrative within our own formal structures. It's people who are not leading structures of the ANC, but we are also engaging with them for them to understand that it is incorrect to appropriate resolutions of conference to themselves and run with them in the context of sloganizing as opposed to the real task that we all should be immersing ourselves on to change the lives of our people for the better.
You are also someone who would have sat in that ANC-NEC Lekgotla over the weekend, and you are someone who would interact very closely with the Secretary General's office, which currently is incapacitated because of the illness of the Deputy Secretary General and the suspension of Ace Magashule, the Secretary General. As the province of KwaZulu-Natal, does that give you confidence that the preparations for the 55th National Conference will go accordingly?
We discussed that matter in the National Executive Committee, and the consensus emerging among all of us, and I'm sure the NEC will communicate that decision, is that we have a pool of NEC members in the headquarters of the ANC, 6 or 7 of them, who should work with the Treasurer General, because in any event, by virtue of being full-time in the head office of the ANC, these are comrades who are supposed to be an additional hand of the national officials and the SGO. So we're very confident that the Treasurer General, supported by that collective of comrades and whatever additional interventions that the national officials may find appropriate, would be able to carry the movement up to the national conference. And we also want to wish the DSG very well. I know that she is recovering, and I do hope that, and I pray with the rest of my comrades and society, that she recovers speedily and come back so that she comes back and occupies that strategic task for which she was elected to execute.
Well, Stephen Hortis, that's Mdumiseni Ntuli. He's the Provincial Secretary here in KwaZulu-Natal, speaking on a range of issues. But I tell you what, the road to the 55th National Conference is officially underway. But before that, this province needs to host its provincial conference. You know, in KwaZulu-Natal, one provincial conference was once taken to the courts, and the outcomes of that conference were taken to the courts in 2015. It is so. The outcomes of this one will be imperative then in setting the tone and allowing us to read the so-called temperature in the room as to who will emerge in the top 6 of the leadership of the African National Congress.